you psychotic, sibilant serpent of a dolt!
Hey folks, hello gorgeous. Welcome to the 5th episode of Cartoon Commentary on the Michael Mercy YouTube channel. If you're listening along on the G.I. Joe Berg podcast, I invite you to check out my channel. All sorts of different reviews on there. Movies, TV, books, and toys. And if you're listening along on my YouTube channel, you'll definitely want to check out the G.I. Joe Berg podcast on iTunes and Podbean. Joining me once again are the gentlemen from G.I. Joe Berg. Robert will be sitting this one out because he is on a special mission. He's been zapped away by the m.a.s.s device. But joining me is Steven. Hey, Steven.
Greetings, everyone.
And also Paul. Paul, how you doing today?
I'm good, and yourself, thank you. Hey, guys.
Fantastic, thanks. We've got our DVD menus queued up to A Stake in the Serpent's Heart, the 5th and final part of the Real American Hero original G.I. Joe miniseries, the m.a.s.s device. Everybody ready?
Oh, yes.
All right. It's going to be 3, 2, 1, and go. And on go, you'll press play. 3, 2, 1, go.
I never get tired of seeing this.
Yeah. I love that.
Guys, what are those stripes on the side of the Mobat?
It's just decoration.
Like, they're not present on the toy.
It's interesting that, well, some of the vehicles look different because they hadn't been made yet. But the Mobat was already, it had been on the shelves for a year. So, just creative license. Sometimes there's creative license, like why is Breaker blue? Or what color is he in this series?
Sort of gray.
Yeah. Yeah, just creative license.
Beardy.
I think it could just be a technique because the side of a tank is quite a bland image. So I think they just add the white lines just to maybe make it pop a bit more, especially because there's 2 of them. It's just a cheat, in my opinion.
Yep.
A good cheat.
And I'm glad they do change that intro up every once in a while because even though I like it, it'll give us something different to talk about every couple episodes. So we're into our recap of what's happened so far. I just recently reviewed the m.a.s.s device, which was released in 2008 as part of G.I. Joe 25th anniversary line. And so if you've watched that review, you're up to speed on the powers of the m.a.s.s device and how it's a MacGuffin powered by MacGuffins. Very cool concept.
Get your credit cards ready because he's pretty convincing. He's got me hunting the bait for one right now.
Good luck finding those D batteries, though. We're in the middle of a crash here. This is a great way to pick up the episode. And once again, we have Joe and Cobra working together to survive a greater threat. Destro, you idiot.
Hammerheads.
Yeah.
I love that even in a situation like this, they have time for the glib little repartee.
That's a pretty extreme spin that they're in.
That's a cool way of getting to the console, because I figured he'd just jump at it, but they're taking G-forces into account.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, as much as they can.
Yeah, cool moment.
You'd think a craft as sophisticated as that would be able to self-right. I mean, well,
you need your drama.
Big time. What does it remind you of? Is there anything in the toy line that this thing bears any resemblance to?
I think something from Starcom.
Yes, brilliant.
Oh, that's wonderful. Take her away, and she just commences to kick everyone's ass.
I dig that about Scarlet. She's super fiery.
The precedent was set by Duke. The second he gets into captivity, he starts flying with the fists.
Those are important little writing moments. Even though she's captured and she's the damsel in distress, it's important to give her, and it literally, time it. What did that take? 4 seconds? But it's an important little moment to give the character a little bit of dignity, that she was able to punch a few guys out and she went down with a fight.
Absolutely.
What's with the pink cape? He's just suddenly got a scepter and a cape now. He's feeling very formal.
Powder blue and baby pink go very well together, I guess.
I'm trying to see that as red or purple, but that is as pink gets. It's hot pink.
Now, guys, I love the way this scene is scripted. Giving your opponents the two things that they should never have, and that's hope and time. Brilliant arguments from Destro. But Cobra Commander is threatening a little bit more harshly than is scripted. Like, he just threw his scepter.
Yeah, it's pretty...
It almost seems to me like there was a rewrite. Like, oh, we can't say, Destro, I'll kill you!
Yeah.
You know, you have to kind of blunten it a little bit. Because the animation, it looks a lot more tense than the scripting would give you reason to think.
Mm-hmm. It's a good scene. It shows Cobra Commander's got a little bit of gumption standing up to Destro, and also it's another little moment where Destro doesn't have to put his tail between his legs. He just crushes that scepter effortlessly. Yeah. So they both come off looking pretty strong.
Yeah,
and then proceeds to take control of Cobra completely.
Mm-hmm. Ouch.
I find a lot of the visual cues from this episode and from moments in this entire miniseries are borrowed from the silent interlude.
Oh yeah, great issue.
Especially when she gets thrown down the stairs. I love that moment. It's very cool. It's very sinister.
Yeah, one of the all-time great, not just G.I. Joe issues, but comic book issues ever. And came about just because there was a problem with, what was it, the lettering, the ink, something. It was not an artistic decision to make it silent. They had no choice. And
I think it was a Deadline issue.
Deadline, okay.
They were under supreme pressure, so Larry Hama just undertook to do the breakdowns and the scripting, of which there was very little. I mean, there were no words, and cut out the letterer completely.
And it doesn't take very long to read Silent Issue, because you can't read it. But I've looked at it. I guess you can't read Silent Interlude, but I've flipped through the pages and enjoyed the story several times, and it holds up.
Yeah, it really does force you to scrutinize it.
I think what tipped you off, what got us talking about this was the design of the Cobra Castle. Very much
definitely.
like the Silent Castle, with a very narrow approach road, sort of carved out of rock. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but there are definitely some shared design cues there. And it leads me to believe, because Larry Hama famously says, I've never watched an episode of the cartoon, but somehow this stuff must have permeated his consciousness, because, I mean, just the design of this castle is, as I say, very close to his design in Silence Issue.
Oh, totally. I think model sheets were definitely shared among Sunbow. I mean, if Sunbow is a division of Marvel, I can't imagine that they weren't in the same building. I'm sure that a lot of that stuff got sort of distilled, or moved through the whole building via osmosis.
Is one of the guys at this table here Honest Gurgi? Or am I just not remembering it right?
Also, a great moment in the scene as well is that they're actually afraid of Destro, but they're strong leaders, so they remain stoic. And
yeah, it's so nice that it's not typical, predictable kind of cartoon schlock.
Yeah, because Cobra Commander will mention something about it later, which shows that Cobra Commander is not as seasoned as Destro, or it doesn't quite have the same class of leadership as Destro does.
Well, he's smug about something. It's like Cobra Commander knows how this is going to pan out.
He just stands there, much like when Serpent took over. He just stands there and goes, "You'll see, we'll see." He doesn't have much of a problem being kind of lurking in the shadows.
I like to give him a little bit more credit and say that Cobra Commander has done the hard yards. I mean, the Cobra organization exists because of him. He knows what it took to get to this point, and these usurpers might have the right stuff when it comes to, certain tactical elements or scientific elements, but they don't know how to really hold the world to ransom. That's something Cobra Command, that's his shtick.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do, and a lot of villains don't have that type of patience to just step aside and go, we'll see. Especially Cobra
No, I
Commander
suppose you're right.
himself, since he's always destroying things and flying off the handle. But it's interesting to see the dichotomy of the character, because he's impatient, but at the same time, he can bide his time as well. And here's Destro throwing fits.
Tantrum.
Now the roles have reversed. I love how Cobra Commander just twists the knuckle. Salt in the wound. It's not, yeah, that's exactly what's happening here. See, it's not as easy as you thought it was.
And some pretty high-tech language being flung around in a kid's cartoon. Destro's complaining about how the leaders of the world need to put it to a debate or take it under consideration or take a vote. You know, like, you're pitching this at what, 7 and 8-year-olds?
Yeah.
But I like that because it's kind of saying, like, that's what makes a good leader. You know, a good leader considers others. You know, a bad leader just wants his own way, like a big 5-year-old.
I think if you grew up in the early and mid 80s and you were watching cartoons and pro wrestling too, it contributed to a very, I'm fumbling for words now trying to make this point, a diverse vocabulary.
Thanks
because
that,
not just the vocabulary in these cartoons, but in pro wrestling too, there was a commentator named Gorilla Monsoon who would always use terminology like got him right in the occipital protuberance and what intestinal fortitude, and instead of just what guts. So it's interesting to see people say something in 12 words when they could have said it in 3 or 4. I personally prefer the longer version. I'm not much of a Twitter person. We're shortening it down for brevity.
That was allegedly always Stan Lee's whole shtick. I mean, he always liked to put in big words or try to create a lot of hyperbole because he wanted kids to see these words and not know what they meant and go and look them up.
Yeah.
Comic book trope over there, folks. That you can block a beam of energy with another beam of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Gung Ho's idea.
Yeah.
Dr. Vandermeer was like, yeah, that'll probably work. It's worth a try. Bzzz.
Now, this is what makes Duke seem like a stick in the mud, where people are cheering and clapping, and he's got to be the one who goes, can it? We got a job to do. No one likes a guy who says, stop celebrating. So maybe, I don't know. That's why Duke doesn't... What's that?
Somebody needs to keep things real, but yeah,
absolutely,
it's unfortunate for him.
But Duke, I feel like in terms of like the heroes of the '80s, Duke is usually the forgotten one. People remember Optimus and Lion-O, but Duke to me seems glossed over. He's always the one who is just too serious. He's like King Leonidas in 300. Just
perhaps lost in the shuffle. There are a lot of like strapping, hunky hero types in G.I. Joe. You could pick and choose, whereas in Thundercats there was only one Lion-O type, and there was only one He-Man,
that's
one
right,
Brave Star, a central sort of hero male figure.
And all those guys had great senses of humor, but it seems like Duke was the one who he could joke. He'd have a nice glib, dry line every now and then, but for the most part, he was strictly business.
What was that guy going to do with the bazooka?
I don't know.
Blow up the mass device.
Alive, and there's a dude with a bazooka. And we could see, exactly, it was lethal. I mean, it could blow a hole in the roof.
Yeah.
Would have wiped out the Cobra Troopers and the prisoners.
Yeah, Scarlett's clearly pissed off.
Look, she got her moments. It's good that she wasn't just the damsel waiting to be rescued.
They let her keep being a fly in the ointment. If you can't escape and you can't beat the bad guys, at least break her with a yellow beard there for a second. Another animation error.
Yeah.
At least be a fly in the ointment if you can't beat the bad guys.
Empire Strikes Back moment.
What is this? Back to tank?
Yeah. This so freaks me out. And it's something I mentioned earlier about how the US government in G.I. Joe clearly has brainwave technology.
Yeah.
Because here they're like revisiting Duke's past. And I mean, and Doc is just explaining it just casually, like, oh, I've known Duke my whole life.
Yeah.
And it's really freaky, actually. I find it to be quite frightening. I mean, for all we know, this could be a reprogrammed memory.
Well, hopefully they're real, and it's an effective way of basically in 15 seconds telling us that Duke really is the real deal.
Yeah.
He is the all-American boy with a German name, hero. What? You can actually do this now? Slow motion. Punch in, zoom in here.
Yeah, this
Cool. How do
preceded
you
the
think
brainwave scanner, but it is
How do you
far
think they
better.
fund this operation? For those of us who got it.
It's really too bad he couldn't just remember that. They stretched it out over a couple episodes because he couldn't remember. Kind of an idiot plot point, but what are you going to do?
What a cool piece of merchandise that would have been for us as kids.
Tracking
to
ring?
have a G.I. Joe ring with like a, I don't know, I think it's almost like a signet ring, but it's that ring you get if you are in the football team or whatever. Like it would have been great for kids to have that. That could have been your secret code that I'm part of G.I. Joe and they're tracking me in case something happens to me.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Oh, pity.
They put out El Cheapo like plastic rings.
Those
Yeah,
glow. Yeah, I remember those. Sergeant Slaughter, I think, was on one of them or all of them.
Yeah.
So they're using the M.a.s.s device here, which is dangerous. I can tell you from personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that the receiving point is accurate. Otherwise, you're going to end up with your dishes in the pool or something. This is weird.
Or your
These little
cats.
these little spider things carrying the MOBATs.
I really like the concept though.
Oh, it's contrived, man.
It really is, but if you think about it, it's a very modular solution to a problem. It's like you don't have to use a different vehicle. You know? You just pop that on.
You'd think in this situation they would just have a vehicle that actually that's its gimmick. Like you got the bridge layer that lays bridges, and you have the Joe vehicle that climbs up walls, but they didn't, and the jumps make sense.
Yeah,
but it just
and seeing them used that way is fantastic as well.
Yeah, but carrying flax up there, it doesn't. What are you going to do? You just set it up there and get in the seat, and it's a mobile, an immobile gun. How practical is it to transport
that
it?
A good idea, Cobra.
Yeah,
sort of gracefully floating gun platform,
Like
vulnerable from underneath.
I don't understand the logic of bringing these land-based vehicles. They should be hitting this thing with dragonflies and jump packs.
It's funny. Like the air support comes in after they've brought all the ground equipment up.
There isn't much room to drive around up there. I don't know why you need the
Also,
tanks and the vamps.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That artillery, those flak guns are not going to serve much of a purpose anyway.
Right.
They actually would have been better at the base of the mountain.
And doesn't Cobra already have flak guns? I think we established that in a.
Paul, you're going to have to eat those words, buddy. I think a flak gun gets used in a very unconventional way just now, if memory serves. But they definitely get a few rounds off.
It's weird seeing Wild Bill piloting a Sky Striker. Always just, for me, he's the helicopter pilot.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, they throw a roadblock into the cockpit of a Sky Striker.
Yeah.
I suppose Wild Bill's actually a far more logical choice than
Shipwreck and Quick Kick too.
Gee whiz, yeah.
We got these super duper Cobra. What are they called? The snakes.
Mm-hmm. Real snakes.
Geez, that guy died.
Yeah, there's no possible way you could have survived that. I hope that wasn't Stalker in that thing.
It probably is.
Maybe that's why we never see him again.
I think this is also one of the reasons we don't see Snake Eyes a lot in later episodes, because they kind of deal with him as if he's Lassie. You know, the way that they talk to Snake Eyes, it's the same as how humans speak to Lassie.
What have you got, boy?
He's a pet.
Yeah,
what's in your bag?
It's interesting they call him Snake for short. Even as a kid, when I hadn't seen the cartoon yet, I hadn't read the comic, and I saw the figures, the G.I. Joe figures on the shelves, I thought Snake Eyes was a bad guy, just because, you know, dressed in all black and you couldn't see his face, and his name was Snake Eyes and the enemy was Cobra. So I thought, oh, he's a Cobra, right? So it's interesting that they even call him Snake instead of
that
Snake
yeah.
Eyes.
Well, at that time, I mean, when we were playing with playing cards, we were playing Go Fish and Snap and, you know, all that stuff. None of us were rocking poker or anything. So the reference was above our heads. We went completely past
Breast.
us. Yep.
Oh my. Duke's
Oh,
getting a
it's
little
very
action
good.
here.
Yeah, I bought your gun.
And
Sure,
then he
what
goes
gun?
right from that to trying to flirt with Scarlet. Here's your gun. Got a little something for
Yeah.
you too, honey.
Oh, here comes He-Man, Conan.
So
Wow.
proto-ferret.
So I didn't mention this in one of the
Melee.
previous episodes, but that sound effect they're using for that guy is the same sound effect they used for Lou Ferrigno's Hulk on the Incredible Hulk TV show.
Oh, I was going to ask because it's so out there.
It's the exact same audio track.
Yeah, it really didn't seem like it was tailor-made for this show.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Blasting through the
Power
door
blows.
and the enemy has been routed.
The DVD
Okay.
packs that Hasbro put out, 25th anniversary style, did any of them have a Snake Eyes that had ungloved hands?
The one that was kind of partially see-through.
He had flesh-colored hands.
Yeah, I believe so.
I need to have a look again, but yeah, they did have one that's like irradiated.
Yeah, he was partially
True,
see-through and
But
had
what I
red
want
see-through
now
parts.
is one that's accurate to the coloring of the show, with flesh-tone hands. It's just
Yeah.
something so kooky about it.
I tried to do a customization myself, but the problem with the 25th anniversary figures is if you pull the hands of the regular Snake Eyes out, it's not just the hands, it's the collars as well. So it's hard to find flesh-colored hands
right
that
fit.
have the same black collar too. You're going to get a mismatch unless you...
You didn't want to just do flesh tone over those hands.
Yeah.
I know there's some weird creases, but didn't stop them with 25th anniversary.
Oh, is that Zartan? No, it's another Master of Disguise. Cobra Commander.
Well, master of something, but not disguise.
I love that Cobra Commander gets captured. It's at least for this first miniseries, it's cool that he doesn't get away scot-free, and you know, there you got your villain there getting away scot-free, Destro, but it's interesting to think now what happens with Cobra Commander.
Any conjecture as to what happens to the mass devices?
Probably put in the same vault as the Ark of the Covenant.
I would imagine so, yeah.
And there's a boo-boo here. He goofed.
Well, that'll learn you. Using your communications expert from Gatlinburg, Tennessee, to operate
So
way above his pay grade.
So they're going to move it manually instead of going to get more elements to try to beam it into its right spot.
Hell no, dude. They don't want to mess with those worms.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, most of them were wiped out, but PETA might be camped out there. They're even more dangerous.
G.I. Joe's an extinction level event.
And that's the Mass Device miniseries.
It is.
5
And
episodes.
it delivers. It has it has two really great lines in it for me, as well. I didn't want to jump in on them earlier, but I love Destro's, and this is kind of mean. This is where Destro's being a little bitchy, I suppose. But he throws out this line, and it's "You psychotic sibilant servant of adult."
Wow.
I love it. It is so. It's actually it's really mean. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, he's mocking Cobra Commander's speech impediment, and it still says he's like a son of adult. It's really classy, actually.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but make a little song when Destro finally gets a little bit of an upper hand. Cobra Commander's like, you know, Destro, don't go, Destro. It just sounds like such a lyric for a song, which I'm not going to sing here now. Maybe one day on one of our video reviews or something.
Sounds like
80s power ballad.
sounds like something
Yes.
Puff Daddy should do.
Yeah. But sorry, I couldn't move on without having to say something about that.
Well, what are your overall thoughts of this final episode and even the entire m.a.s.s miniseries?
Okay, well, the thing with the Master, for me anyway, I really like it as an introduction to GI Joe. It does give us a lot. It does create a lot of set pieces and things that we can, as kids, we could take home and play, with our toys. It sets up the bad guys really well. I find that the Master Vice, and I'm saying this from a place of having just watched the entire Masters of the Universe series. I really love that Master Vice sets things up from the beginning. It tells us who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. We know that this is not necessarily their first confrontation, but it still takes the time to introduce us to these characters because it knows that they are new to us. Where I find a lot of cartoons from the same era didn't do that. They just sort of threw us in the middle somehow and expected us to just get things and just eat the mythology. I also feel that the Master Vice miniseries, when compared to the other miniseries, which are also very enjoyable, is conceptually very strong. Things like the Master Vice itself is a great visual. It's a great visual tool. It's a great prop.
It's gargantuan. It's this humongous thing.
Exactly, and we get to see so much of the stuff that we will play with being used properly. And by properly, I mean it's not just like a hokey moment of using this vehicle to do something ridiculous. It really is using a tank as a tank. I mean, obviously they put them on spider legs and they climb up walls and all that, but it's just great to see the vehicles being used over and over again, not always being named. For a toy commercial, it's very subtle, and I'll still always defend GI Joe a little bit, because of this miniseries. I know that cartoons from the 80s are often criticized as being toy commercials, and I know conceptually they were sort of designed to be that, but it really does feel like G.I. Joe tried to be something more than that. And this miniseries pushes that angle perhaps a bit better than all the others, because the others the rest of the episodes do sometimes feel a bit toy commercial-ish in spots. But great. Great introduction to G.I. Joe's animated world. A lot of the tropes have already been set up. A lot of lovable characters have been introduced to us already, and some very good, memorable moments make for a great miniseries for me.
I agree about it being so much more than it was probably initially conceived to be. Stephen, what are your thoughts on the final episode of the m.a.s.s miniseries and the 5-parter in general?
It's easy to be an armchair critic now, but looking back over this miniseries with the context of what came later, it's nice to see the ideas and the characters being presented in their purest form. This whole MacGuffin and it relying on smaller MacGuffins, which then gets separated and becomes a race. This is the template that unfortunately repeated itself ad nauseum, read 2 or 3 times in later miniseries, and it started making episodes feel redundant. In the Master Vice, however, every episode feels like it's telling a fresh story with its own 3-act structure. It's relying on what comes before and it's adding to what comes next. But each episode is very watchable within itself. The action is unique to each episode. The concepts and locations are all unique within each episode. I find this a very, very fulfilling miniseries to watch in isolation. And I'd put it up there as probably... it might take the top spot for me. I don't know. It's between this and Arise, Serpent, or Arise, because I'm just a fan of like the 1986 team. But then again, you've got to add the good old Sergeant Slaughter into the mix, who is a little bit of a blowhard and kind of dominates the series at that point. So this is great. The production values are terrific. Personal high point for me will always be the sort of commando team's infiltration of the relay star station. So that's Snake Eyes coming in through the fence, and Scarlet coming in on the jump, and Stalker coming in on the ram. Great use of the characters, great use of equipment, very fluid animation that was a real treat. And it's something that we see in the 80s, and it's something that we see less and less of nowadays. I mean, Resolute was probably another high point for animation production values, but I mean, that was just like a very brief once-off and never followed up on. So yeah, I couldn't be more enthusiastic about this show. The one criticism that I have, and this is typically always going to be my prerogative as a toy fan, first and foremost, is the toy designs are strong. The designs that are sort of spun outwards of the toys are less set in stone, less clean, less interesting to me, more amorphous, more... I don't know. I mean, Russ Heath was responsible for a lot of the designs, and he's one terrific artist. His stuff it just blows my mind. His adaptation of the toys to animated elements, perfect. But wherever there is a craft that isn't a toy, like those giant snake armors, like those spider climbing platforms for the heavy vehicles, they're always a little bit lackluster, and like it doesn't integrate so well for me. I'm like, kind of dialed that design in, unfortunately. Even the prototype vehicles, like, I just wish they'd gotten
like that shark, the weird looking shark.
That was a stronger one for me. The weaker ones were like the precursor to the Rattler. Yeah, they were a little bit too smooth.
I also don't like the fat dragonflies, to be fair.
Well, what are you going to do, man? You needed a dragonfly with a bigger capacity.
Oh, totally.
Me neither, but at the same time, I appreciate that the people doing the show went, I'm sure this is where Hasbro would love us to use dragonflies, but in this particular situation, it's not practical, so we need to tweak the dragonfly and
why is that? Looking back at that scene...
Could have
been handled by a two-seater. I suppose they needed that drama of like, oh, I'm going to fall out of the crew.
Yeah, I think that's why they added it there. For this final episode, what's always appealed to me with G.I. Joe is the military aspect, and when they veer too far from that, that's when my interest starts to wane. When they get into the space stuff and the sci-fi stuff, I like the military, the real world military aspect of it. And in this final episode, I like the battle at the end. It feels like a military battle. There isn't too much stuff going on that's kind of like a cartoonish drama. It's just a straightforward battle. G.I. Joe just routs Cobra. They capture them. Destro gets away, but they get Cobra Commander. It's a straightforward battle, and the real American hero wins the battle. And I found that very satisfying. And the miniseries in overall, Paul, you mentioned how you were watching He-Man before, and how this took its time to build, introduce characters properly, whereas shows like He-Man, other cartoons that were sold into syndication at something like 65 episodes a shot. The reason there's no continuity to the story is because no one ever knew what order they'd be broadcast in. So you couldn't have continuity because episode 1 might play one day and episode 45 might play the next day and then episode 32. So they got lucky here that this was ordered as a 5-part miniseries in 1983. So what we get here is a proper introduction, and we get a proper story stretched over 5 episodes. And that's the real bread and butter when it comes to animation for me. It's continuity. The cartoons that I try to go back and watch that I grew up on that don't have continuity are the ones that I really lose interest in. But like Thundercats has great continuity, and this 5-parter is fantastic. It's a 5-part story instead of later on what would happen with the series is all these one-shots that were not connected in any way. But even then, like in the second season of G.I. Joe, they sink the flag in one episode, spoiler, and then they raise it a few episodes later. So even then, there was still some continuity, and I always appreciated that about G.I. Joe, that it tried to have things flow from one episode to another. The two-parter episodes of G.I. Joe are also fantastic, and then the other 5-parters I really enjoy too. Those are my favorites, the ones that tell a story and take their time to tell it. And I really love
No Place Like Springfield, one of my favorites.
Yeah. So I really appreciated the time that it took and the continuity put into this 5-parter. And I also appreciated every time they brought the military realism to it by having these different little missions, and they didn't play favorites. It's not like Duke was on every mission, or Scarlet gets captured later on, so she doesn't get to go on a certain mission. But certain shows can play favorites even if there is a giant cast. Like Transformers in the 3rd season is a good example, where almost every episode is Rodimus, Ultra Magnus, Cup, Springer. Even though that giant cast of characters, and they keep it to those guys, basically. I like in this one that there's a mission for Snow Job and for Tripwire, and then there's a mission for Torpedo, and then you don't see him again, and then there's a mission for someone else, Gung Ho and Wild Bill. And I like that there were different missions, and the appropriate soldier was assigned to those missions. So I really enjoyed that part of it too.
Something that and I'm pretty sure I'll say this again down the line somewhere, but with G.I. Joe, I love how there's this sort of subtlety in terms of its continuity, something you touched on earlier, where a character like Shipwreck, his character is established. So when he does certain things in later episodes, and I'm putting a spotlight on Shipwreck for this, but it happens with other characters as well, you expect that behavior from him, so there's a sort of predictability in that character's behavior in that episode based on behavior he's had in earlier episodes. So although not always a direct continuity or direct continuation, that character's traits are still strong enough to reappear 10 episodes later, and for a viewer to see that and go, oh, Shipwreck is here, he's going to do something like that, or Quick Kick is here, I think he's going to get into this kind of situation, or, oh wow, this is quite a challenging situation for Quick Kick. Oh, why do I know that? Oh, because I know Quick Kick because I was introduced to him properly 10 episodes ago or whatever.
Yep. So that is the original G.I. Joe miniseries. I believe it was just titled A Real American Hero, right? But
I think it was always unofficially called the M.a.s.s device, just like the next one, which is Revenge of Cobra.
Yeah.
Is titled, well, after the MacGuffin, really, which is the Weather Dominator.
Yeah.
And Pyramid of Darkness, which is, I think, the Further Adventures of G.I. Joe. What an uncolourful title. Let's just call it the Pyramid of Darkness.
Yep.
Guys, I've just stumbled onto an Easter egg, and I think I'm going to not actually discuss it and just leave it for the listeners if they want to do some digging. The first episode of this miniseries and if you have the DVD collection, this will help, but at 4 minutes and 33 seconds, mind blown. Ooh, bet you guys are wondering what it is now.
Discuss amongst yourselves in the comment section, folks.
Little something about Destro that we might not have known before, but we finally have confirmation of.
And we will leave you with that. So that is the M.a.s.s Device miniseries. I want to thank Paul and Stephen for joining me. Guys, G.I. Joeberg, let's give G.I. Joeberg a plug. Where can people hear and see more G.I. Joeberg content?
You can find us on most social media platforms, Twitter at G.I. Joeberg. You can find us on Facebook. Just type in G.I. Joeberg, one word, and we'll pop up. We have a YouTube channel, G.I. Joeberg, and we have a podcast, G.I. Joeberg. But if you're looking for G.I. Joe stuff on iTunes and you type in G.I. Joe, I think ours will pop up pretty convincingly. Yeah. We are a fan cast, just talking whatever pops into our heads about G.I. Joe. There's a lot of material to cover in this hobby of ours. We are very, very passionate about it, and Our topics vary. Hell, if you're a listener, you can suggest a topic you'd like us to discuss. We try and keep it topical, but there's always a good little retrospective to our childhoods or nostalgia or just doing top 5 lists. You can never get enough of that.
I got one to suggest.
Oh,
Whatever you just
mind blown.
Whatever you just
Sorry.
mentioned, yeah, the Easter egg, the mind-blowing Easter egg. That's your next topic that I suggest. All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot for joining me, and to the listeners, thank you very much for listening. Thanks for subscribing, and we will be back shortly with the further adventures of G.I. Joe, with the Weather Dominator, Revenge of Cobra, whatever you want to call it. We will be coming right back with more cartoon commentary. Until next time, Nerdmas Day.